Every time a gasoline car starts cold, a small chemical reactor fires up under the hood. A catalytic converter, packed with a platinum group metal, converts toxic exhaust into something close to harmless. That metal, more often than not, is palladium, and roughly 40% of all the palladium mined anywhere on Earth comes from a single company in a single Russian city above the Arctic Circle. The city is Norilsk. The company is Nornickel, formerly MMC Norilsk Nickel, the world's largest palladium producer. Norilsk sits at 69 degrees north latitude, inside the Siberian permafrost, reachable only by air and by the Yenisei River during the brief summer months when ice permits. It was built by Soviet Gulag labor in the 1930s and has never stopped producing. The ore beneath Norilsk is extraordinary, a sulfide deposit at the Talnak complex containing nickel, copper, cobalt, platinum, and palladium in concentrations that make it one of the richest polymetallic deposits ever found. The architecture above ground is Soviet brutalism half buried in snow. The architecture below ground is what the entire global catalytic converter industry depends on. Here is the number that matters. Russia accounts for approximately 40% of global palladium mine supply, and virtually all of that flows through Nornickel. In 2025, Nornickel produced around 2.725 million troy ounces of palladium, down 1% year-on-year, in line with its own forecasts. Total global mine supply runs around 6.5 million ounces per year. South Africa produces most of the rest, around 2.3 million ounces, but South Africa's Bushveld mines run deeper at higher cost, and with chronic power outages and labor disputes that have plagued the sector for a decade. There is no other deposit anywhere that can replace what Norilsk produces at Norilsk's cost. Demand for palladium is almost entirely automotive. In 2024, an estimated 85 to 90% of all palladium consumed went into catalytic converters, specifically three-way catalysts for gasoline engines. The metal works at the molecular level, accelerating the conversion of carbon monoxide, unburned hydrocarbons, and nitrogen oxides into carbon dioxide, water, and nitrogen. It works under conditions that platinum handles less efficiently, which is why palladium became dominant in gasoline cats from the late 1990s onward. Tightening emission standards, Euro 7, China 7, new US EPA heavy-duty rules have pushed palladium loading per vehicle upward. Hybrids use even more than standard combustion engines because their cold start cycles are more frequent. Secondary supply from recycling spent catalytic converters now covers roughly 25% of annual demand, a meaningful buffer, but not a replacement for primary mine output. The geopolitical exposure has been live since February 2022. Western sanctions hit Nornickel's financing, its insurance access, and its ability to do business with European counterparties. The company's net profit fell 37% in 2024 to around $1.8 billion, carried, squeezed by both sanctions and weaker metals prices. But here is what did not happen: the West did not sanction palladium itself. The metal is too embedded in too many supply chains. BASF, one of the world's largest chemical companies, had a long-standing palladium sourcing arrangement with Nornickel and was still navigating that relationship years into the war. German, American, and Japanese automakers depend on catalytic converter suppliers who depend on Russian palladium, a dependency that runs 4 layers deep and is not visible on a factory floor in Stuttgart or Ohio. Nornickel's response to Western pressure has been to redirect and restructure. China has absorbed an increasing share of Russian palladium exports, buying at prices below international benchmarks. The metal still moves, it just moves east. In 2024, Nornickel's controlling shareholder Vladimir Putin announced plans to relocate some copper smelting operations to China from 2027 onward, partly to circumvent Western restrictions on equipment and market access. As Putin himself put it, we are transferring our problems to China, where they will be solved more efficiently. For Western manufacturers, the supply chain exposure has not disappeared. It has become harder to trace. Nornickel also carries an environmental legacy that belongs in this story. In May 2020, a corroded diesel storage tank collapsed at a Norilsk power plant, releasing 21,000 metric tons of fuel oil into the Ambarnaya and Daldikan rivers, one of the worst Arctic environmental disasters on record. Russian courts fined the company a record 146 billion rubles, roughly $194 billion. The rivers turned red for weeks. The spill poisoned fishing grounds that indigenous communities in the region had used for centuries. The infrastructure failure that caused it, aging Soviet-era tanks that were never replaced, is not an isolated case. It is a preview of what happens when a company running critical global supply runs on deferred maintenance. The substitution problem is real but slow. Platinum can replace palladium in gasoline catalysts, and some automakers, Volkswagen, Ford, General Motors, had begun transitioning catalyst formulations by 2024. But widespread substitution takes years of reformulation across hundreds of supplier relationships, and as palladium prices fell from their 2022 highs, the economic incentive to substitute weakened in 2026. Nornickel warned that palladium output could fall by as much as 11% due to declining ore grades at the Talnak complex. The Talnak concentrator expansion is not scheduled for completion until 2028. Less Russian supply. Less pressure to substitute. The two forces work against each other in ways that keep Western manufacturers strategically exposed for years more. Palladium prices tell the same story from the market side. After falling to around $900 to $1,000 per troy ounce through much of 2024, prices surged more than 80% through 2025, breaking above $1,900 by late December, driven by slowing EV adoption reducing the pace of substitution away from combustion engines, and by growing anxiety about Russian supply reliability. The market has priced in the dependency, even if policy has not addressed it. What does the failure scenario look like? A comprehensive G7 sanction on Russian palladium, the kind that was floated but never executed, would immediately disrupt supply to every catalytic converter manufacturer outside China. South Africa cannot rapidly scale production. Recycled palladium covers some gap but not a 40% shortfall. Prices would spike sharply, with analysts citing figures above $1,500 per troy ounce as a floor that the 2025 market briefly proved credible. In the medium term, the auto industry would accelerate platinum substitution, but that takes years of reformulation and retooling across hundreds of supplier relationships. A single city above the Arctic Circle, built on forced labor, running on Soviet-era infrastructure, under an authoritarian government engaged in a land war in Europe, and it still sits in the exhaust system of roughly half the gasoline cars on the planet. That is what a single point of failure looks like when no one decided to build it. It just accumulated compound interest on convenience, there until the dependency became too large to unwind.